Hello, everyone. My name is Kate, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Introduction to Phrase TMS for Project Managers webinar. This is happening this evening for me, but I know it's the morning for many of our viewers. So wherever you are in the world, welcome. If you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to go to slido.com and enter the code TMS11. And that'll bring you to the questions portal where you can just add whatever questions you have for our presenter, who I'm pleased to introduce. Our presenter today is Giorgio, a solutions architect on our team. And Giorgio has prepared a demo for you all that has been pre-recorded, and then we'll do the question and answer section live. So feel free to drop your questions into the Slido as we go. We'll play the video and then we'll get to your questions at the end. All right.
Hello, my name is Giorgio. I'm a solutions architect here at Phrase, and I'll be giving today a training focusing on project management within Phrase TMS. I'll be going over various functions of Phrase TMS, and at the end we'll have a Q&A session in case there's anything you might still be unclear about. So there's going to be 4 parts to this webinar. The first is going to be an overview of the user interface. The second is going to be how to configure a project and a job. The third is going to be a brief overview into the linguist perspective. And 4, we'll close out with some PM tools that are really useful. So, okay, let's get started. So the first thing I want to show is the user interface. So once you log in, which you can do so via any browser, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, or Edge, you'll see the projects page where we can see all ongoing projects. For example, ID number, name of the project, the progress bar, create date, etc. So from here, we can filter projects. So for example, let's suppose that you only want to see projects created within the last 7 days. So you can click on the filter icon here and click on date created and then specify the last 7 days. And so you'll see projects that fall within this criteria. And you can build filters on top of each other. So now suppose that you want to see not only projects that were created in the last 7 days, but that one of the target languages is Spanish. So now I will go back to the filter and say target language, Spanish. And so it'll only show me projects that fall under both of these active filters. So we're reviewing only a specific subset of projects here, and you might want to jump back and forth between this view and a view of all projects. So you can click here on Save Changes in View, and that'll let you jump back between this filtered view and your untitled view, which in this case is all projects, so that you can jump back and forth between either those projects or every single one of them. You can also customize this table. So say, for example, that you don't need to know the project number here at the left. So you can go here at the right of the page here and click on the column settings button, and here you can unselect it. And like the filters above, you can also save this into the view. So that's it for the projects page. Let's go into the jobs view. So in the jobs view, and we'll go into a little bit more detail regarding jobs versus project, but you can consider a job as a specific translation assignment that belongs to a project. And so here we can see all the relevant data. I have some filters, but I'll remove them from now. So here we can see all the relevant data here. For example, the language pair, word count, the file name being translated, as well as the project it belongs to. So same as in the projects view, you can also filter the view here. So I'll refresh my page so I can show you the filters that I have already enabled. So here we see a few projects that have multiple jobs, but I've condensed them so I can only see the files per workflow step. And the projects shown to me are only the ones that are categorized under domain 4. If I disable the filters and groupings, as you saw just now, it'll show me the raw data of every single job for every single project. So it's just a matter of setting up filters so that you can see exactly what you need. Let's go to this project, 87642. Sorry. Okay, so here we can see all of the individual files that are being translated. So I have this job here, and I see that one of my linguists already declined it. So I can choose to delete him from here, and I can add another linguist. Let's say Pepe and Henriette, and I click on Done. And so that will now assign the task to them. This doesn't mean that both of them will work on the same file. This means that they will both be notified that they have new work available, and whoever accepts it first will get to work on it. So to summarize, this jobs page is basically a good page where you can get an overview of how every individual job is doing per project and basically what needs to be done. It's very customizable, so make sure to spend some time getting acquainted with it so it shows you what you really want to see. Alright, translation memories. So you might already be familiar with them, but in short, this is the page where they are stored. And the translation memory, you can think of it as an index that records every single translation. And this is what you can use to leverage them for future translations. So on this page, you can filter and search for specific ones. So here I can click on filter and say, for example, I'm going to search for one for which one of the target languages is German. So let's select this one. So if you as a project manager have been granted the right to by an admin, you can make new TMs or edit existing ones. So this one, for example, has German content. And I have the access rights to be able to edit this TM, so I can just double click on the segment and I can start making any changes that I deem necessary. If I mouse over the blue icon at the right, it tells me a little more metadata about that segment. For example, when it was created and modified and the project and file that it came from. Again, this editing right is something that the administrator here in TMS may or may not have granted you. Besides editing segments here, another thing I can do is I can import them. So for example, if I have an existing translation memory, I can bring them here as long as they're there in TMX, Excel, or XLIFF formats. I can also export them if I wish to use my translations in another tool, and I can also align them. So what this function is for when you have translations that were carried out outside of Phrase and you want to import them here to leverage them for your future translations. And finally, below, we have a list of projects that have used this TM. Next section is Termbases. And these are basically glossaries in case that you have specific terminology requirements. And these can be linked to QA checks later on, so that if a linguist, for example, uses a forbidden term, the QA check will mark it and warn them. So let's open up this one. So you can add words individually, like so. But if you like, you can also import them in bulk. You can import them in TBX, which is the industry standard format, or an Excel format, in case you already have an existing glossary. If you want to import it into an Excel format, first click on Export to generate an Excel file. And even if you hadn't added any terms yet, but this is basically the format that Phrase TMS is expecting, so you can populate it there and then import it back here through this other button. All right, that's it for Termbases. Let's look at the users page. So here's where you can set up users that you want to grant access to for various use cases within TMS. And TMS has 5 types of users. The first one is administrator. They have the power of life and death. They can create and delete anything. Templates, users, connectors, projects, project templates, pretty much anything. Then project managers. So project managers will be the ones who are managing the translation projects themselves, and they can be granted very granular access rights. For example, I may choose to allow this particular project manager to create projects, but maybe I don't want him to view projects created by other users. Or maybe I don't want him to be able to modify project templates created by other users, as well as many other options regarding translation memories, Termbases, or other users, and metadata as well. Linguists. So these are basically translators, and they will spend most of their time in the editor view translating, and they have very minimal access rights compared to admins and project managers, but they can be granted some access rights to edit Termbases and translation memories. Guests. You can think of them as ghosts. They can see almost everything, but you can really lock them down so that they can't really change anything. And it's good for users who you want to grant some read-only visibility so that they can personally check in on the status of projects. And finally, submitter. So someone who just wants to submit a file for translation but doesn't really need to be involved here in TMS, or they might not be familiar with the entire translation or localization process. They just want to send the file over and receive it once it's ready without concerning themselves with the translation memory or what linguist to use. And they would be able to do that through the submitter portal, and through which I'll go in a few minutes. You can add users individually, and if you mouse over the new button, it'll tell you how many user licenses you have. But if you want to import them in bulk, you can click on the import button where you'll be able to download an Excel file that you can populate with your users, for example, your first name, last name, username, and email, and their role, and then you would be able to import that here. All right, next section, Phrase Language AI. So here's where you can administer your machine translation engines. So at the top, you'll have a default profile of machine translation engines that you can use later on in your projects. Let's look at mine. So by default, you'll get these 7 machine translation engines. Some organizations like to create separate profiles. For example, if they only want to use specific machine translation engines for certain content. You don't need to do this because behind Phrase Language AI, we use an AI-powered tool called AutoSelect that picks the best performing machine translation engine based on language period translating and the type of content. So if you're translating, for example, medical content from English into Spanish, it might pick Google Translate. But if you're translating legal content from French into English, it might pick, for example, Microsoft Translate. And that's always changing because these machine translation providers are always improving their engines. You can also set up empty glossaries here. So sometimes you might want to have terminology that you want to translate a certain way that the machine translation engine might not be familiar with, or even the opposite. Maybe there are particular words like brand names that should not be translated, so that the machine translation engines will respect the terminology, similar to like a term base. Next, phrase analytics. So beyond the daily project management, you or your team might have questions about how you're using phrase. How many projects do we have in a given time period? Or what language pairs do we process the most? So if you as a project manager have been granted the user access for it, here's where you can see the historical data of all projects in Phrase TMS for the last 12 months. So say, for example, that we want to see how many words we've translated. We can see that in this volume tab. And we can see, for example, in January, we translated this many words and for this particular language and processed by these particular providers. There's also other tabs here that show other information beyond just volume. So time, for example, to see projects that are delivered on time versus projects that are overdue. Or quality, if there's, for example, any quality issues with the translation that may have been detected, among a few others like quotes, cost, savings, and leverage. So these are static dashboards based on the most common questions that we receive. But if you want to create your own dashboard with customized data points, then we have a separate add-on called Advanced Analytics that helps you really truly customize and combine your data in a way that you want to see it. Next is the submitter portal. So this is where users can create requests for translation. And again, this is very appropriate for the submitter type users. So if I'm a submitter, for example, I'd be able to just select my source language. So my document is in English and I want to translate it, say, into Spanish and maybe Italian. Or maybe in this case, just one language. And I can select this particular service that I've already defined. So maybe I just want professional translation. And so there's a few ways to load up my file. So if the file's in my computer, then I can click on Load Files. If it's on an external online repository, such as Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, then I can click Add from Online Repository. And if not, then I can just paste the text here directly. So then the file will be pre-processed and it'll give me a word count. And I can optionally select the due date. And in this case, I've already attached a pricing sheet connected to this particular submitter portal, so I can see exactly what it's already going to cost. But this is optional, and I can click Submit. So here's a receipt page that tells me that the request was successfully received. And now let's go to settings. Some of the settings here are going to be managed by your administrator, but there are a few important things here at the bottom, especially here under user settings. So language, so that's if you want to change the entire language of the user interface. So if you would prefer it to be in another language besides English. Spell checker user dictionary, so that's more relevant for the linguists who will be translating, but if you want, you can provide them with a dictionary of terminology in Excel format that they can then load in here in the user accounts, and it'll be used as the spell checker when they're translating. time zone is actually really important because this defines the time zone that you're in. And this one's important because Phrase TMS will use your time zone to calculate job deadlines. So if I'm in the UK, for example, then the listed deadline of any given job will be different by about 5 hours compared than if I'm in the East Coast of the United States. So when you first log in, make sure to select your time zone to make sure the deadlines that you're selecting for your linguist are shown correctly to you. And two-factor authentication. So this isn't mandatory, but it's always a good idea to add extra security to your account. You just need either a Google Authenticator or Authy app on your phone. So, okay, that's it for the user interface. So let's go to create a project. So I'm going to go here to my project page, and I'm going to click here on new at the top right. And I'm going to give a name to my project. So test project, November 14th. My language is going to be source, and I'm going to translate into Spanish, Arabic, and Chinese. I can also optionally add some metadata. So for example, domain, domain 4. I can also add a note. And here at the left is where we can define the settings that will govern a project. There's a few in particular that I want to call out. So for example, machine translation engine. So here's where I can pick one of those empty profiles that I showed earlier. So I can either pick an empty profile that will be used for all languages, or I can specify a specific, I can pick a specific profile on a per language basis. Analysis. So a default analysis will be done when when I bring up a file for translation, I can create an analysis for it, which will basically be a breakdown of how many words there are. So that will give me and the linguist an idea of how much work there is to be done. Pre-translation. So as soon as you upload a file, Phrase TMS starts processing the file and looks for specific patterns. And so if you want, you can enable what we call pre-translation. So we can enable a few features here, for example, such as how much to translate from the translation memory versus machine translation, or other features like what do you want to do with repeated content. So for sentences that appear exactly the same in multiple areas, should they be propagated to those repetitions, or should linguists have to review them one by one? Or for example, what should be done with 100 and 101% matches? So should they be confirmed or even logged so that the linguists don't touch them? So for this project, I'm going to set it up so that they show up as confirmed. Quality assurance. So these are automated QA checks that can be defined according to your needs. So for example, spelling or empty target or extra numbers in target. So it's just basically very quick checks that help linguists find errors in the translation so that they can fix them accordingly. So for example, I have this on here for character limitations. So I want to specify that the translation should have no more than 130% of length than the original length of the translation. And you can also set it up so that the linguist can ignore them in case there are false positives. But this is something that that you should discuss with your linguist team to determine what particular QA settings might work best for you. You can also specify regular expression checks. So these are basically custom checks in case that you need more control. So for example, if you're translating a few, say, numbers from English into Spanish, you might want to be able to use a regular expression so that numbers that are written with decimal or with commas in English, for example, 1,00 for 1,000, are represented accurately in Spanish would be 1,000. Just one thing though, these checks apply to all languages in the project, so do be careful when applying them across the entire project. So that's just an example though. Access and security. So you can allow linguists, for example, to edit the source or the content of tags. So for example, we'll see that in a little bit, but number tags represent non-translatable tags, like for example, URLs, which normally aren't translated. Like if your text says phrase.com, it's always going to be phrase.com, but maybe you want your translations to point to an already translated page. So if your text says phrase.com/en and the translation should say phrase.com/jp for the Japanese one, that means the URL will change. So with this setting, the linguist will be able to do that in the tag. You can also edit linguists to edit source content, as I mentioned here, but note that this won't propagate it back to the source file. This is only going to be here in the translation. Spell checker. So spell checker with words with capital letter if identical term is used in source. So basically this means that spelling of proper nouns is also monitored by the spell checker. Otherwise, words with the first capital letter would be treated as names and then otherwise would be skipped, as well as spell check words in all caps. Financials. So here's where you can define price lists for freelance translators that you're working with so you can track costs. And workflow. This one's important. This determines how many workflow steps are in a project. So if you want to have a translator work on a file and then an editor, you can add 2 workflow steps. Say, for example, translation and quality assessment. So you would define these in the settings area. And these are just the ones that I have in mind. But you can have a maximum of up to 15 steps per project, and you can name them anything you'd like. Another option here is file handover. So this will add the ability to upload a final version of the file. So for example, if you need to carry out any post-translation formatting on the file, like fixing a PowerPoint or maybe typesetting an InDesign file, you can upload the finalized version to Phrase using that. So I'm going to click Create. And that's it. My project is created, or at the very least, the blank skeleton of what our project will be. And so the first thing that I want to do is add my translation memories. So I can just straight up add them, but there's a few options here. Like if I'm translating into new languages that I've never translated before, I can create new TMs for it. But otherwise, these are languages that I've translated before, so I'm just going to select my translation memories. However, there are a few further settings that I want to show to help with TM management. So you can add TMs to all workflow steps, or you can add TMs per workflow step as well as per language. And this is something that some organizations like to do. Say they like to add a working TM to the first workflow step, to which they will not save any translation, and then only once the editor carries out the revision step, that's when the translations will be saved to the TM. So it's a good way of maintaining control of your TMs and avoid having unnecessary poisoning of the TM, especially if you're working with newer translators. But for simplicity, I'm just going to add all TMs for all languages and all workflow steps. So we'll continue. So I'm going to add this TM because it contains some of the languages here. So this particular TM has a few languages: Arabic, German, Spanish, Russian, Chinese. But this project has only some of the languages: Arabic, Spanish, and Chinese. So it'll work just fine for now. And I can specify if I want to save new content to it or not by checking or unchecking this right box. And I can also add penalties. So maybe, for example, I'm using this TM, but maybe I also want to add another TM. But maybe this is a TM with legacy content from maybe a few years ago. So I want to add a penalty of 1% so that I can still leverage content from it, but then linguists will have to review everything just to make sure that everything is okay. But for now, I'm only going to use this TM. So same thing with Termbases. Let's add one. I'm going to add it for all languages. So here I can specify, for example, this is the Termbase I'm going to add. But I can also specify if I don't want linguists to be able to add new terms to it. But in this case, I do want them to. So I'll click on Save. And at the bottom, reference material. So for example, this is where I can add a reference file that linguists can reference as they translate. So for example, style guides, screenshots, links to external websites, or even a note. I can add them here. So if we know that we're going to receive projects of a similar nature in the future, say for example into the same languages, we can create a template out of this project. So that way when I create a new project, I don't have to manually enter all of the info again, like all of my languages and my TMs and my pre-translation settings. So I can click on Save As and save as a template. And here's where you can give it a name. So template 1, November 14th. And I would remove the project name because that means that every project created under this template is going to have that name. So I'll just leave it blank for now. And so when I save as a template, when I create this template, this is going to preserve all of the settings that we defined earlier. Like, for example, the character limitations, the languages I picked, the metadata, translation memories, and term bases. Even if I had attached a reference file, that would also appear here. And I can also even specify, for example, I already want to assign some providers to it. So next time that I translate something through this profile, my first linguist assignment for Spanish, it's always going to go to Pepe. And for the quality assessment, it's always going to go to Henriette. All right, so let's go back to the project though. So now that we have our translation assets, let's create a job. So I'm going to click here on New next to Jobs, and this is going to take me to the job creation page. And this is where I'll be selecting the file that I want to translate. So like in the Submitter portal, I can either browse for a file directly on my desktop, or I can add it from an online repository if the connector has already been established here. So in this case, I'm going to browse for it in my desktop. And this is the file that I want to translate, a new original file that is going to be translated. So I can add my providers here. So for example, I can add, say, Pepe and John. So this doesn't mean that they're both going to work on it. So as I've established it now, I can notify them, but they'll be notified all at once. So whichever one of them checks their email first and accepts the job, they're the winning party. They win the translation. But if not, what I can do is I can set it out so that they're each notified, say, in intervals of 60 minutes. So Pepe is notified now immediately. And if he doesn't respond in 60 minutes, then John will be notified, and then he'll have a chance to say yes. But for now, I just want to assign it to Pepe. And I'll also assign Henriette to the quality assessment step. Below is file import settings. So in case that you need to define specific parameters for the file that you're going to translate. So say, for example, if you're translating a PowerPoint file, should hidden slides be included? Should speaker notes be included? Or for example, for Microsoft Word, what about comments or hidden text or anything like that? Or if there's any text within, for example, variables, or maybe like curly brackets, parentheses, should those be included? Then you can also add them here using regular expressions. But otherwise, let's just create the job. We have the file browsed here and click Create. All right, so the job has been created, and we see that there are 3 jobs, one for each language. So again, remember, a job is an individual request for translation for each particular file. So because I'm translating one file into 3 languages, there's going to be 3 jobs. If I were translating 5 files into one language, that would also correspond to 5 jobs instead. So from here, let's say for example, I forgot to add a provider, say for my Arabic translation, so I can now edit it here. So I can click on either the pencil here, or I can select the job and click Edit, whichever one you like. And so now I can add my provider here. So I can say I want Gustav to work on it, and I know that he's always going to accept my work, so I'm going to change it to accepted, or I can just wait for him to accept it. Either's okay. And due date, let's say that I want it on Wednesday the 15th by 1 p.m. Perfect. Now we have our second assignment there. So with these jobs, I want to run an analysis because I want to know how many words there are for translation. So I'm going to select these jobs and I'm going to click on Analyze. And so the default settings, the settings that we see here basically mirror what we defined earlier in the project. But we can change them here just in case anything changed afterwards. So for example, should internal fuzzies be included? Should log segments be excluded? Things like that. Really, the only thing I'm going to change just now is that I want to analyze it by language. And I'll click Analyze. And so here we see that the analyses are being created. And so let's open up analysis number 2. And yeah, here we see that there's a little over 1,900 words, but there's quite a few, 100 and 101%. So there's quite a bit of content that already has been translated. And from this analysis, I can now generate a quote. So for example, Pepe, he's a freelancer, so I want to send him a quote so that he and I can both see how much, what would be the expected spend for this translation. So quote for Pepe, and he's going to work on the translation, and Pepe is the provider. He's already established his pricing with me, so I'm just going to pick default pricing list, or Pepe's price list actually, that's more correct. And then the analysis, it was analysis 2, that was the Spanish one, and I can click on next. And this is a pricing. So he's already told me beforehand that his minimum pricing is 25 and he charges 8 cents per word. But maybe for this one, he decided to accept a lower minimum. So it's going to be 5 cents and his minimum is 15. So I'll click on next. And then in this next page, I will see what will be the total that, will be spent on this translation. So I can click on save and email. And so that's going to send him the quote. Oh, no, not that one. Quote email for linguists. That's the one. And I can say, dear, or hello, Pepe. And that'll send the email. Okay, so let's jump real quick into the cat view. So I know this is a PM training rather than a linguist training, but there's still 1 or 2 things that I want to mention. So here, for example, the tags that I mentioned. So if a linguist wants to be able to edit them, then they would just be able to, for example, click here, edit, and tags, expand tags. So in this case, oh, let me do that again. Okay, so it's just a formatting tag. So it's not like there's a URL in there. If there were a URL, then we would see a tag that would expand. But in this case, it's just a formatting one, so there's really not much to expand. But anyway, so the editor view here is where the translators are going to spend most of their time. So this is the classic cat tool view. So source on the left and target on the right. Here we see, for example, this word in yellow. So this corresponds to a term that was detected in our term base. Here we see, for example, scoring that came from scoring that came from both a combination of TM from our translation memories and machine translation. So for example, the ones with the green check mark, remember I established that for 100 and 101%, I want everything to be confirmed. So when my translator, in this case Pepe, he goes in here, he knows that he can just skip over these because they have been translated in the past. No need for him to retranslate again. But, okay, let's suppose that I'm the project manager and I hear word that the source file was changed. So now we need to translate a new updated version. So what we can do is we can come back here to the project page and we can click on select the jobs, click on tools and update source. So I'm going to browse for the updated file and it's going to be this one, the updated version. And I'll click on update source. And so that's going to bring the new version of this file to Phrase TMS. And so if a linguist is in the middle of a translation, they will get a notification letting them know that the source file has been updated and to please refresh their page so that they don't lose any work. So now if we open up the translation again, we can see, yeah, so for example, this one here, now it's empty because it changed, as well as this one. So yeah, so we can now just add the most relevant content either from the TM or from the machine translation, whichever one works best, and then I can carry out any changes that might be necessary. Let's look at how it will look with the character limitations that we added before. So we run a QA check. Let's let it run for a little bit. Here we go. So there's quite a few issues here. So some of them are spelling. So it's detecting that some words are misspelled, but well, in this case, it's not actually a misspelling. It's just, it's not detecting that these words are from Japanese origin. So in this case, I or the linguist could just ignore them because these aren't really misspellings. But for example, this one here, remember that I established 130% character limitation. So it's exceeding the English by more than 130%. So a linguist would have to change the translation so that it fits within that 130% parameter. If you're reviewing a segment and you see something problematic, then you can just add a comment here. So for example, add Pepe, and I can add him, so he gets a notification in Phrase TMS later on. Please double check this translation. And so later on, he would be able to see that. And you can even also add linguists that are going to be working on this. So for example, I can also say at Henriette, because she's going to be able to work on this. So please verify. And so she'll be able to verify it later when it's her turn to review this. So let's go back to the project page. And now I'm going to change the workflow step to the second one that we added, which was quality assessment. And this is a human evaluation of a translation, and it lets you mark errors in translation using a grading matrix. So think of it as when you take an exam in school, you have to reach a minimum percentage in order to pass. So this is kind of similar to that. So I can run an LQA here. You can start the assessment, and I can say, for example, yeah, no, this translation is incorrect. So why is it incorrect? So I can say the error category, omission. There's a part that they didn't translate. How bad is it? Is it neutral, just like a stylistic issue, or is it neutral, just like a stylistic issue, or is it critical one that adds a serious error? So then I can flag it as such. And then I can finish my evaluation. So in this case, my scoring threshold that I established means that the linguist passed. They got 99.40%. If they had gone below 90%, then they would have failed. And this is something that you or the administrator can work on customizing as well. And you can actually also generate a report from this to send to the linguist afterwards, and it would look something a little bit like this. So it's essentially a report card that shows where the errors are and the weight for them. So for example, mistranslation is weighted heavily in my organization, so it costs a little bit more. Or even more, for example, inconsistent with term-based costs even weighs even more. So I see here, for example, the source text, the original translation, and the corrected translation, and what the error category was. So it's a good way for to provide feedback for linguists who are working on your translations. There's a lot more detail that we can go into here in the editor view, but that'd be a little more appropriate for a linguist session, which we actually ran yesterday. If you weren't able to view it live, these webinars are always recorded, so check out our website for the link to the recording. And we also have Help Center articles regarding pretty much everything in Phrase TMS. So here in the editor view, you can click here on Help, and then Help and Documentation. And that's going to take you to our user manual, which will show you every topic regarding the editor view. And there's also even a specific section for everything regarding project management. And yeah, okay, so let's go back to the project page. So there's a few more tools that I want to show that are really useful for project managers. So new, for when you want to add new files for translation. Edit is for when you want to select a job or multiple jobs and you want to, as I showed before, you can edit it and you can select either the translator or the status or the due date. Download. So there's a few options here. So you can download the original, the source file, in case you want to review it or check it for reference or troubleshoot it or if anything. You can download an XLIFF that you can use in another CAT tool, such as any other CAT tool. But keep in mind that these other CAT tools can process text differently, so you might see some issues with tag or segmentation. You can also, if that's part of your process, you can also download a bilingual Word file of the translation in Word, and then your linguist can carry out the changes there, and then you can upload that corrected file, and I'll show you in about a minute or so how that can be done. And you can also download it as a TMX, so for when you want to export the translation on TMX format, but that's generally something that would be added to like a translation memory, so that would really only be advisable only once the translation has been completed. A completed file is for when the translation has been completed, and you can download the file as is in the current workflow step that you have selected. So in this case, I would be downloading it from the second quality assessment step. And again, like I showed before, you can move between them both by selecting them here on this little drop-down menu. Final file, it's a little different from completed file, and that corresponds to the file handover setting that I described earlier. So it's more used for files that have to undergo like a final processing step outside of Phrase TMS, or so for example, like typesetting an InDesign file. So you can upload that final file here for archival purposes. And so that would unlock the option to download final file. If the files for translation came from an online repository, again, like Microsoft OneDrive or SharePoint or Google Drive, then you can re-import the files, either source or targets, to keep the files here up to date. Analyze, as I showed before, shows the analysis options here. So you can run what's called a default analysis, and that'll give you a word count with TM leverage. You can also run a post-editing analysis, and you would run it after the translation is done. So that indicates that essentially indicates editing effort, how much editing the original text required from a linguist or a proofreader. And the last one is a compare analysis. So it compares two versions of the file in different workflow steps on a segment level, and it shows you how the two versions differ. All right, the pre-translate button. There's a few options here. So you can pre-translate either like from the translation memory. So this again, so kind of like the analysis one, that also mirrors what we established in the project settings. But if I want to pre-translate it with different settings, then I can change a few settings here. Okay, human translate. So if you have a partnership or an integration in this case with an external translation provider such as Gengo or on Babel, you would be able to send your translations, so send your files directly to them, and then they would be able to translate them for you. Copy source to target where empty. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. If your target segments are empty, then this will just copy the source file, so in this case English, to my target segments. Pseudo translate. So this is good for when there is content that you want to verify that has all of its content being grabbed for translation. So this one, for example, I've used in the past for InDesign files to make sure that all text that is being grabbed for translation and that it's not a static image. And the last one, delete all translations, and you can specify what segments in particular you want to delete, maybe all of them or only the unconfirmed ones, and so on. And tools. So email, for when you want to send an email to the provider. So for example, you have new work, or I created a custom email template that is a job reminder, so I can send this to the linguist. So in this case, I selected the job where Henriette is assigned to it, so she's already been added to the recipient field. Split file. So in case you have a huge file that you want to assign to a group of linguists, then you can split the file either in multiple pieces, whether it's by every number of words or every certain segments, or just the total number of parts. Export workflow changes will show you the balance of how the translation changed across different translation steps. So what was added, what was deleted. I can show you here what that would look like. So I haven't actually made any changes here, but if there had been any changes, we would see anything highlighted in red. Clone, for when you want to duplicate a file. So maybe, for example, you want to assign it to a different linguist for comparison purposes, or maybe the original linguist is just taking too long and you need to get this done ASAP. Extract terms, for when you want to create a glossary list, then you can extract words that occur in a specific, in a text, in the file that you've uploaded. And so you can specify here certain criteria under which TM will extract words. So depending on the settings that you specify, it'll generate a list of terms that occur in that file. Update source, so as I showed you, is if you're translating something, but then there's a change in the source file, then you'd be able to update it here. And again, if there's any linguists working on it, they'll get a notification letting them know that they have to refresh their page to continue. And update target is similar. So if the file had any changes outside of TMS, like maybe a final reviewer reviewed it outside of Phrase, then and that's the most up-to-date version, you can bring that here so that your translation memories are kept up-to-date and current. And upload. So remember earlier when I mentioned that bilingual word file? So yeah, so this is where you would upload it. So again, if you prefer to have your translators carry out your review in a bilingual word file, then this is where you can bring it up here. And you can also specify what should happen to the segments that have been reviewed. So save them to the TM, or only confirm them, or don't save anything to the TM. and assign providers from templates. So if you've created a project template previously, like I showed, and there's already linguist assignments in that template, then you can use the assignments from that template to bring them here into this project. And two more options here. So download and send LQA scorecard. So this refers to the report that would be generated at the quality assessment step. So you can download it and email it to the linguist. And that's pretty much it. Let's open it up for questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Giorgio. That was awesome. Pulling up the questions here. I'm going to share the link in the chat so we have easier access for any questions that anyone might have. There you go. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them into the Slido. Okay, looks like we don't have any questions yet, but Giorgio, do you want to talk for a minute about some of the different file types that folks, if they're project manager, can upload into Phrase and what they can translate using the Phrase CAD tool?
Yeah, so there's a lot of supported file types. So, man, too many to count. But yeah, so this is all, there's a little bit more information that you can find in our Help Center articles, but a lot of file types are supported. So for example, just the most fundamental ones like Microsoft Word, pretty much like the Microsoft suite. So Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and within those files, you can also customize and this is something that I mentioned in the webinar, like customize, like what should be brought in, like comments, notes, speaker notes, things like that. But even beyond the Microsoft suite, I mean, there's a few other file types that you might want to translate. Like, for example, if you're working, say, like a little more like design heavy, then you can translate, say, for example, Adobe FrameMaker files, InCopy files, InDesign files. If you're working maybe with something a little more like strings focused, like maybe you want to translate like a like a JSON file, or maybe like CSV files, or yeah, there's really a lot. I mean, we can even do we can translate like subtitle files, and we can set it up so that the time code is preserved as the translator like works through each segment, so they can see exactly like, oh well, this segment takes like 6 seconds to 8 seconds. So yeah, so there's a lot of use cases depending on the file type that you might want to translate.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I see one of our participants has a question, so I'm going to let Michael come on through. Michael, go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. Sorry, I didn't see where to type. It says chat disabled in my sidebar, so forgive me here. But
Yeah.
so regarding bilingual Word files, do you have an example of what that might look like? Why would we potentially, prefer that, doing that versus, or what does that look like? Why might we prefer using that? Does it still use that phrase translation interface with those nice side-by-side columns and all the rows?
Yeah, so let me actually, so I can share my
Thanks.
screen again real quickly and show you what that looks like. So it looks like a little something like this. So yeah, so not too dissimilar from what you saw in the CAT tool. So source on the left, target on the right. And so there's a few use cases for when you might want to use this. I mean, one of them is if maybe, for example, you want to have an external reviewer, or just not even external, but just a reviewer who you want to carry out some final checks on the file, but they're not a linguist. They're not really going to be using like the QA functions or LQA. They don't really know anything CAT tools. Like, for example, maybe like legal review. So then you can just send out this translation. They can make their changes here, and then you can bring it back into Phrase TMS. So that's one of the possible use cases where you can export this file, carry out the changes, but still being able to keep them in your translation memory. So later on in the future, when you do export them again, there might be less changes required.
Okay, and someone who's using that document would do that offline, or not in the Phrase?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So this exactly, this does imply that you would use this. This whole review section would be done offline. Sorry, this whole review part would be done offline. So you would download this. You would be able to click on download and then generate the docx file. So you would either email it to them, or however you want to transfer it over to them, so then they can work on it at their pace. They would send it back to you, and then you would just upload it back here, and then that would keep your translation up to date.
Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
Great, looks like we have one other question from Lisa, so I'm gonna let Lisa come on through.
Hi there. And just whenever you mentioned subtitling, I was just wondering if the translator would have the ability to edit time codes while they were in there. Because currently, you know, when you're trying to work on a subtitling project, you have to go into one software to, you know, prep the time codes and prepare it for translation, and then upload it into your translation memory software. And then the translator would do the translation while they're watching the video. But often you have to then go back into your subtitling software again to edit the time codes and, you know, do the line breaks and things like that. I mean, that's what we currently experience from our current program. So I was just wondering, is there any of that functionality within Phrase?
Yeah, so for time codes, I believe that depends on the specific type of file that you are translating. So I think it depends if it's like SRT or VTT. So some of them would just display as like a context node at the bottom, so that wouldn't be able to be edited. But you know what? I'm not 100% sure on this one. So let me make a note of this, Lisa, and I can reach out to you and let you know specifically how that would work with editing, because I believe there's a functionality for it, but I want to be double sure.
And just another question, if that's okay. It looks quite easy to upload an updated file, which is great. But I was just wondering, is there the possibility to edit the source, you know, directly within the program? So, for example, if a client just wanted to make a very slight change rather than having to upload the file and everything that sort of goes along with that, you know, you may also have prepped the original file, so that you can just make, you know, small changes more easily.
Yeah, so that is something that you can definitely do. So let me share my screen real quick again, and I can show you what that would look like. So this is something that would depend on the project. So for example, if I go here, this is my project. So I can click on edit. And if I go to access and security, then I can allow linguists to edit the source. So maybe I want to be able to let them edit them for this particular one, but not for another one. So if I keep my project open here, then I want to go here to the menu here, click on, edit, and then edit source. So then I would just be able to carry out any changes as necessary.
Okay. And could the project manager be the person that did that rather than the linguist?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So pretty much anything that a linguist can do, a project manager can do as well.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you for that.
Brilliant. Thank you all for the questions, and thank you for attending our webinar this evening or this morning, depending on where you are in the world. We appreciate you, and this recording will be available soon. Before we go, I just want to show you really quickly. We do have a slide, or we do have a couple more webinars happening this week. So as Giorgio mentioned, David did a intro to Phrase TMS for linguists yesterday. That recording will be available soon. And then coming up Friday morning Australia time will be introduction to phrase strings with Alicia. So if you're interested in either of those topics, the link is just there. It's under our website under webinars under resources. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.